not going to be able to do justice to the text. And probably I won't do justice to the text, because how can you? But it feels to me quite important that we're hearing, you know, I really want us to hear the text and see if we can sort of hear it poetically, you know, not worrying too much about like exactly what it says or what it means, but like, is there a phrase that touches us, or is there an image where we're just like, oh, I noticed something happening in my heart or in my body at that moment. So before I start on talking, what we're going to do is I'm going to read out some of the sections of this, the Way to the Beyond chapter that we're going to be looking at this morning. And then we'll just sit for a couple of minutes and just let that settle, and then I'll start talking. Last night we heard kind of like the setting up of the story, how Brahmin Bhavari gets told by a goddess spirit, there is an enlightened one in the world and he can't go, and he tells his 16 students, you need to go, you need to find this enlightened one. How amazing, there's an enlightened one in the world. And then they walk several hundred miles up to northern India, looking for the Buddha, just like hoping that there is an enlightened being in the world. So what we're about to hear now is some of their questions and responses. Dotaka's questions. The Brahmin student Dotaka was the next to speak. Master, he said, I so much want to hear you speak. Please, Master Teacher, explain to me, can a student of your teachings find the calm of Nibbana for themselves? Any student of my teaching, said the Buddha, who is eager, intelligent, and aware, here and now, can find the calm of cessation for themselves. I can see now, said Dotaka, that there is in this world a person who has nothing, a Brahmin, a wanderer. I bow down and honor you, sir, the eye that sees everything. Please, man of Shakya, free me from confusion. It is not in my practice to free anyone from confusion, said the Buddha. When you have understood the most valuable teachings, then you yourself will cross this ocean. Have pity on me, Brahmin sir, said Dotaka. Please teach me the way of detachment, so that I can know it as it is, so that I can live in this life in the peace and independence that is as free as the air in space. I will explain that peace which is not based on hearsay and is attainable here and now. It is a peace which, when a mindful person understands it, releases their hold on the world. In every direction, said the Buddha, above, below, around and within, there are things you know and recognize. When you realize that these are the things which tie you to the world, then you can lose the thirst of craving. the desire for constant becomings. Pingia's question. Then the Brahmin Pingia spoke. I am old and decaying. My body is weak and my skin is pale. I can hardly see and I only hear with difficulty. Don't let me die while I am still in confusion, but teach me the way things are, so that I shall know how to leave birth and aging behind me. Look, said the Buddha, look how many people are tormented by pain. Look how careless they are and how greatly they suffer because of the body and of forms. If you do not want to go on and on becoming Pingia, you must let go of the body and of forms. In all the 10 directions, said Pingia, above, below, and in every quarter of the compass, there is not a thing that you have not heard, seen, known, or understood. Teach me about the way things are, so that I shall know how to leave birth and aging behind me. Can you see, replied the Buddha, how people are oppressed by desire? Can you see how they are racked and worn with aging? If you do not want to go on and on becoming Pingia, you must let go of craving. This is just going to be the first few verses of Pingis Praises of the way to the beyond. I will sing you the praises of the way to the beyond, said Pingia, when he returned to where the Brahmin Bhavari lives on the banks of the river Godhavari. It was described to us by this man exactly as he saw it. But then there isn't any reason why a man like him should lie. A mammoth of knowledge and completely pure. A man without desire. When a voice has none of the glibness of pride, none of the ingrained stains of ignorance, then its words are full of sweetness and beauty. It is such words that I praise now. They call him Buddha, enlightened, awake, dissolving darkness, with total vision and knowing the world to its ends. He has gone beyond all states of being and of becoming. He has no inner poison drives. He is the total elimination of suffering. This man, Brahmin Bhavari, is the man I follow. It is like a bird that leaves the bushes of the scrubland and flies to the fruit trees of the forest. I too have left the bleary half-light of opinions. Like a swan, I have found a great lake. Up till now, before I heard Gautama's teaching, people had always told me this. This is how it has always been, and this is how it will always be. Only the constant refrain of tradition, a breeding ground for speculation. This prince, this beam of light, Gautama, was the only one who dissolved the darkness. This man, Gautama, is a universe of wisdom and a world of understanding. A teacher whose Dharma is the way things are, instant, immediate, visible all around, eroding desire without harmful side effects, with nothing else quite like it anywhere in the world. Well, there's other things like there's a commentary on the Way to the Beyond chapter that is also counted in the canon, and it's kind of quoted elsewhere. And actually there's a lovely bit where later on some elders come to the Buddha and they say, so this Way to the Beyond chapter that we keep reciting, so could you just clarify what you mean in this one? And they've all got different interpretations, and it's really lovely what the Buddha says actually, because he says, well, that was what I meant, you're right, but actually all the rest of you, you've got it too. Everything you're saying is right as well, so you can interpret it in all those different ways. Yes. And it's got a very particular flavour to it. So with a lot of the Pali Canon, you get the same passages coming up again and again, you know, the same words used to describe the Buddha or the Dharma or, you know, the Four Noble Truths, and then the kind of like the paragraph about the Four Noble Truths gets trotted out, or the five skandhas. Now with this, there's none of that. There's not a list from start to finish of the dialogues. Actually, I quite like lists, but there aren't any in this. It's thought that it was written down about 400 to 300 before the Common Era, which is like really early, really early. And to me, I think there's something about hearing the authentic voices. It just feels like it's as close as it's possible to get to know what people said, you know, like what was it like to meet the Buddha? And after the Buddha's enlightenment, you know, what was he trying to say to express what was inexpressible? So I'm going to say something about the translation first, because certainly whenever I start looking at these texts, what you realise is you are in the hands of the translator. And there are quite a lot of good translations of the Sutta Nipata now, both online and in book form. And Bhikkhu Bodhi's had one out relatively recently, which is about that fat, and it contains all the commentaries. And it's got really fascinating notes in it. So it's like, I really recommend it. But the one that I've stuck with is Sadatissa's translation from 1985. He was a Sri Lankan monk who then came and lived in this country. The reason that I've chosen it is because basically he talks to the heart, and he says it should be understood that this is not a strict translation, but rather a rendering of the spirit of the suttas. Oh, great, we've got somebody else coming in. Who is it? They're behind a pillar. Hello, fantastic. Do come in. Yes. And Sridharpa, who's one of our old members who translated the Pure Land Sutras when Ratnaguna was doing that, he talks about how to translate is to betray. And in a way, you can't ever translate into another language. And you can either choose a kind of betrayal where you say really precisely what every word means and it's technically correct, but you end up with these slightly awkward sentences that like nobody would actually say. Whereas the other method of translating is to kind of, you work out what those words mean and then you think, okay, I've understood the meaning of that sentence. How would a British person express that, or how would an English speaker express that? And it doesn't work word for word, but actually when you read it, it kind of like speaks to your heart. And that is what Saddhatissa has done. Yeah. Oh, and just to say, in the I've got, so if you're online, you've had the text sent to you, and we've got texts at the back of the room for taking to groups if you wish to. And I've noted on those, sometimes I've changed the gender. So sometimes I've changed it to gender neutral from like he, him, his, if it seemed like it wasn't particularly going to interfere with the text. So, yeah. Okay, so it's this question and answer. You've got the prologue and the epilogue, and then you've got the question and answers, which are the oldest bit in the middle. So let's hear some of the questions that the Brahmin students ask. And you might just all want to think, if you'd walked 500 miles to see the Buddha, what would you ask? That might be a question for your group. What would you want to ask? So this is just a selection because I can't go through all 16 of them. So Ajita says, what is it that smothers the world? What makes it so hard to see? What pollutes the world and what threatens it most? Then Tissa Matea, who in the world is happy? Is there anyone who isn't full of agitation? I just hear that and I just think, that is a question that I could ask, from my heart. There's just they're just such human questions. I just feel like I could be sat, in this shrine room, I could be sat next to somebody who wants to know the answer to that question. So this one's Punyaka, more of its time. Why do Brahmins, rulers and others offer sacrifices to the gods? Do they work? Good question. Metagu. Where do all the different kinds of suffering come from? Hemaka. Please explain to me the way you teach to put an end to craving. Tadeya. What is the nature of freedom? And how can I recognize a wise person when I see one? Just really good questions. And I think one of the reasons that I really, really respond to the Way to the Beyond chapter is, you've just got this sort of classic quest story with these 16 Brahmins setting off to find, they really want to know what the truth is about the nature of existence. And I just, before I met the Dharma, I was growing up in suburban Surrey and just looking around at what people's lives were and thinking, is this what my life is supposed to be about? I'm supposed to grow up, get good A-levels, go to university, get a good job, get married, get a house, get a career, have kids, the kids do the same again. And it's all about what caravan you've got and have you got a timeshare in Portugal or something like that. And I was just like, I cannot do, this cannot be what my life is about. I can still, there was this sort of existential, I'm alive, I'm aware, here I am. What? What am I supposed to be doing with this life? And I don't think I would have been able to phrase it in words, but it was there as this kind of sort of feeling that I couldn't really express. So then we've got also the responses when these Brahmins meet the Buddha. So when they first see him, they say, he's like the glorious sun with 100 rays, like the moon when it has arrived at its fullness. You know, when you've got just one of those totally clear skies and the moon is kind of like huge and round and pure silver and it's just covering everything with light. And they meet the Buddha and they say, it's like that. It's like that. And then they just sort of express their delight. Master teacher, for me, there can only be joy and delight to hear you talk about a supreme way, which, when a mindfully living person hears it, releases their hold on the world. That's Metagu, who asked about suffering. I had heard that there was an ocean crosser, a hero, desiring the desireless, and so I have come to ask a question of this man without desire. Tell me this, eye of instant seeing, knowing, what is the state of peace? That's Jatukani. And then Udaya, gone beyond in every way, the ultimate in everything. When he sits in meditation, there is no poison to infect him, no dust speck to impede him. He has done what has to be done. And you know, I've just picked a few, but like as you go through, it's just like person after person after person is just expressing like what it is like to meet someone whose mind is completely freed. You know, they're bowled over. You know, it's just like, no way is this really possible in the world. And they're just expressing that in such direct language. And I suppose I also relate to that very strongly to like when I met the Dharma. And actually where I first met the Dharma was in South America, in a slightly improbable manner, where I managed to pick up a book that I wasn't at all interested in by the Dalai Lama. And I was just like, Eastern religions, they're all a load of rubbish, aren't they? And then I picked up this book by the Dalai Lama and started reading it. And I was just like, no, you know, I mean, I just stayed up all night until I'd finished the book. I was just like, no way. I can't believe that there's like this information, this knowledge in the world. And like, how can this knowledge be in the world? And I haven't encountered it, you know, it just, so, yeah. So again, you might want to sort of like touch into, well, what have your experiences been of encountering Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and just that immediate response of like, I've really, there's this sort of direct knowing of value, and it's with the mind and it's with the heart, and it's like it's with the whole body. It's like, you know, our cells vibrate with hearing the truth. And this is what we're hearing with these Brahmins that have walked across India to meet the Buddha. So then we've got the answers, like what the Buddha says. And okay, this isn't what the scholars say, this is just how I have it in my imagination, that actually this is really, really soon after the Buddha's enlightenment. And in a way, he hasn't worked out how to talk about awakening and the path to awakening yet. I mean, if you think about like your deepest meditation experiences, or maybe when you've, you know, you're on retreat and it's like the 5th day of silence and you step out of the shrine room and suddenly everything's really vibrant and, you know, there's a sense of openness or connectedness or whatever it is. And then afterwards, when we try and put words to that, actually it's like, it's impossible. You're trying to express something that it is not possible to express in words. And this is what I hear from the Buddha's responses. You know, he's just like, He's walking through the world. He's fresh from his enlightenment. He's just had this thought, you know, he had this thought like, I don't think I can teach the Dharma, like I'm not going to be able to express this. And then he's trying, you know, he's meeting these people and he's saying, it's like this. It's like this. But it's very unworked out. And to me, this is totally my interpretation, but it just sounds like he hasn't worked out a path of how to say to people, okay, so what you need to do is you need to practice the Noble Eightfold Path, where you start with this and you do, then you do that, and then you do the other, you know, ethics, meditation, wisdom, you know. He hasn't worked any of this out yet. And he's just trying to, you know, and then he's just trying to express it. And he just says, you need to drop craving. And then you kind of go, how do I do that? You know, he just says, you need to see it as it is. Yes, well, I'd quite like to, but how am I going to do that? So, you know, it's very direct, and it's very pithy, concise, direct to the point, totally uncompromising. And it's more like a description of the goal in a lot of places. And the path is basically like mindfulness, and then you will see how it is, and then you will drop craving. Drop craving, practice mindfulness, then you'll see how it is. And in a way, like he just keeps on saying the same thing again and again and again. And that some things are notably absent. So he doesn't really mention ethics, and he doesn't really mention metta, not explicitly. But I might say something about that tomorrow. Yeah. So here's a few examples of the Buddha doing his wisdom teachings. If you are always aware, Mogaraja, you will look at the world and see its emptiness. If you give up looking at yourself as a fixed and special identity, then you will have given yourself away to go beyond death. This one's to Metagu. In every direction, there are things you know and recognize. Above, below, around, and within. Leave them. Do not look to them for rest or relief. Do not let consciousness dwell on the products of existence, the things that come and go. And to Udaya. That which ties you down is the desire for pleasure. The wandering is applied thought, and the way to Nibbana is to abandon the thirst of desire. So tomorrow I'm going to talk more about like the content of the Buddha's wisdom teachings that he's giving, and talk more about that and craving. But now we're going to go a bit more into the dialogues that we heard at the start of the session. So Dotaka and Pingis. So Dotaka, I just always want to give him a big hug. I'm just like, that's just the sort of thing I'd say, or that's just the sort of thing I do. So he says, so he starts off saying, Master, I so much want to hear you speak. Please explain to me, can a student of your teachings find the calm of Nibbana for themselves? So basically he's saying, can we do it, or is it just for special people like you? And the Buddha says, any student of my teaching who is eager, intelligent and aware, here and now, can find the calm of cessation for themselves. So the Buddha says, yes, you can do it. And what you have to be is eager, intelligent, and aware. So that eager, that's a tapi, that's this fire, this heat of interest and sort of passion, eagerness for the spiritual life. I did look up the word for intelligent, but it just meant intelligent. And aware, that's sati mindfulness. And so again, that might be a question for your groups, like, do we think awakening is possible for us? Like when we hear that, do we think, oh yes, if I bring eagerness, intelligence and awareness, I can do it? So then the Buddha, Dotaka, gets really excited and he says, I can see that there is in this world a person who has nothing, a brahmin, a wanderer. I bow down and honour you, sir, the eye that sees everything. Please, man of Shakya, free me from confusion. You know, I could just hear all his heart in that, like, please tell me the way out of like this, you know, my total numpty mind that keeps tying myself in knots and causing myself and others suffering. Like, tell me the way out, like, help, free me from confusion. And I just love to imagine this interaction, because then the Buddha says, it is not in my practice to free anyone from confusion. When you have understood the most valuable teachings, then you yourself will cross this ocean. I can't do it for you. And, you know, there's bits in the Dhammapada like that. You know, the Buddhas are only guides to the path. No one can purify another. And I mean, this is really radical for Dotaka, because he's just saying, like, drop your habitual way of being, because he comes from a tradition where there's this kind of like revealed truth way back in the past. And what you have to do is like do the rituals, which you know, that's you living your relationship with the universe, is to participate in these rituals and to learn the tradition. So basically, it's not possible for you to see it and know it for yourself. So again and again in these dialogues, the Buddha's saying, no, it's direct seeing. You need to see it for yourself. Don't just believe a tradition. So Dotaka hears this and he says, it can only bring me joy to hear about an ultimate peace, which, when a mindful person understands it, releases their hold on the world. And then we get a verse very similar to Maitrisiddhi, where the Buddha gives him this straight down the line teaching. In every direction, above, below, around and within, there are things you know and recognize. When you realize that these are the things which tie you to the world, then you can lose the thirst of craving, the desire for constant becomings. So like I said, we'll leave that and look at that tomorrow. It's quite interesting about this releasing our hold on the world, like letting go of the world. And I think sometimes it can sound like we're abandoning the world or escaping the world or leaving the world behind. But actually, when you look at the usage in the texts, that's completely not what it means. You know, it's more talking about like, basically it's talking about our grasping on the world. Normally when we think about grasping, we think about grasping a self, you know, like a fixed idea of us. But actually it's just as true that like we have a fixed idea of us and then we grasp a fixed idea of the world, or we have a fixed idea where I want the world to be like this, and then we get upset because it's not the way we want, and also because it is fluid and changing and we don't like that. You know, It's the grasping that we let go of rather than the world, if you see what I mean. And the Buddha is also saying, and you can live it here and now in this very life. Just wonder if I didn't read that bit, yeah. I will explain that peace which is not based on hearsay and is attainable here and now. It is a peace which, when a mindful person understands it, releases their hold on the world. So now, Pingia's question. So generally everybody's heard of Pingis Praises, but they haven't necessarily heard Pingia's question. So Pingia, he's the oldest of these 16 brahmins that make it across India to see the Buddha. And he asks this question about old age. And just to say, like, once I did a puja over in the community quite a number of years ago, based on the Sutta and the Way to the Beyond chapter. And I got people reading the different verses that I felt fitted. And I got Ratnashuri, who was at that time in her late 80s and struggling to see and struggling to hear, to read this one, big print. And, you know, I mean, I just found it very, very moving to hear her read, I am old and decaying, my body is weak and my skin is pale. I can hardly see and I only hear with difficulty. Don't let me die while I am still in confusion. But teach me the way things are, so that I shall know how to leave birth and aging behind me. And of course, I was finding it really moving, and Ratnashuri is very matter of fact, so, you know, she just read it like it was the back of a cereal packet. But again, you know, you can just hear Pingia's real voice, like his existential need to know, and seeing the real spiritual issue, which is in, you know, he'd be experiencing impermanence in his own body and finding that painful, and knowing that he was soon going to die and he wasn't yet freed. You know, there's this real existential urgency about coming towards the end of life, like, you know, you don't have much time left. And, you know, are we going to meet the Dharma in another life? Yeah. And then the Buddha says, look how many people are tormented by pain. Look how careless they are and how greatly they suffer because of the body and of forms. If you do not want to go on and on becoming Pingia, you must let go of the body and of forms. So what he's suggesting to Pingia is a practice where he notices, both in his own experience and by looking at the experience of others, the suffering that there is in old age, and particularly like sort of clinging to wanting a healthy body and wanting not to grow old and wanting not to die, and just seeing that friction, you know, the painfulness of the friction between what we want and what is actually inevitably just happening. And then Pingia just says again, he just asks again, teach me about the way things are so that I shall know how to leave birth and aging behind me. And the Buddha, basically he just keeps saying the same thing again. Can you see how people are oppressed by desire? As I said, like, we'll go more into that tomorrow, because it's like, well, do we see ourselves as oppressed by desire or not? The Buddha again, can you see how they are racked and worn with aging? If you do not want to go on and on becoming Pingia, you must let go of craving. And in a way, that might be a real question as well, because it's like, you know, in myself, I think, yeah, I do want to go on and on becoming. I just want to be sort of like healthy and well and enjoy myself. But yeah, I want to keep on going and becoming as a fixed and separate self. That's what I want. And the Buddha's saying, well, no, actually, that is grasping suffering. But like, actually, it does take quite a level of insight to be able to see that. Like, I'm just like, no, I want to go on and on becoming and being happy. Thank you very much. The Buddha's just doing this sort of direct pointing that this is the point of suffering, when you want to be a fixed and separate self. Do you see that when you grasp that, you are grasping suffering? So then we're now jumping to Pingis Praises. So this is much later. This is after the brahmins have practiced with the Buddha, and at some point Pingis makes his way back down India, back into Maharashtra, and he goes back to find Bhavari, his teacher, who sent him to see the Buddha. And quite naturally, Bhavari wants to know what happened. Did you find him? What went on? And then you get Pingis just pouring out this sort of paean of praise of just like, yes, it was amazing, and we found this guy, and he was completely enlightened, and it was like this, and it was completely fantastic. I can have a bit of a tendency to nihilism, and it just feels like the whole world goes grey and closes in around me. And when that happens, I find Pingis Praises and I read it to myself, and it's like it just kind of opens everything up again. Oh yeah, maybe I'm not kind of like locked in a box. So, Pingis uses these very beautiful similes to express his joy and delight. It is like a bird that leaves the bushes of the scrubland and flies to the fruit trees of the forest. Like a swan, I have found a great lake. And again, I suppose it's that area again about like a swan, I have found a great lake. And it just reminds me of that kind of like freshness when I first found the Dharma, when it's just like, my goodness, I had no idea that there was this in the world. That swan, that's an example of Sadatissa doing a lovely bit of translation, because some of them have water bird. So, like a water bird, I have found a great lake. It just doesn't quite work the same, does it? A moorhen? A duck? Yeah. Yes, or we've just got these. So you've got this sort of image of like freedom and expansiveness, contrasting with others. So a bit later, he says, there was a time when, writhing in the mud of the swamps, I could only drift from one stone to the next. And I mean, I don't know if you relate to that image or not, but I mean, it's a very visceral image, isn't it? Writhing in the mud of the swamps. I just get a picture of myself sort of like naked, rolling around in this sort of smelly pond mud. But I do, like that does actually describe to me how my life felt when I was just like looking around, like trying to work out what meaning was in the world and how I was going to live. And it was more like I just sort of drift from one thing to the next. Oh, maybe I'll go in that direction. Oh, maybe I'll go in that direction. And then Pingis says, but then I saw the Sambuddha, fully awake and free from defilement. There's a direction. Okay, so I'm not going to read out all of Pingis Praises, but we are going to hear it in tonight's puja. And again, he has those beautiful verses about the Dharma, just like this sort of heart response to, what is it like when we meet the Dharma? Instant, immediate, visible all around. Just very, very beautiful verses. And it's a bit like that Dharma section in the Tiratnavandana, and you get those phrases again and again in the Pali Canon, where it's like, these sort of qualities of the Dharma. But here we're like right back at the first moments, like the roots of that, like what people actually said, their response as they encounter the Dharma. So what I find very interesting about this is Pingis says absolutely nothing about the content of what the Buddha said. So he doesn't turn up and say, oh, the Buddha, yeah, he gave me these really great wisdom teachings and he said mindfulness was really important. And he talked a lot about dropping craving. You know, he doesn't say any of that to Barbary. He just goes on about like swans and fruit trees and writhing in swamps, you know. Anyhow. So what he expresses is the qualities of the Buddha and the qualities of the Dharma and how it feels to encounter them. So it's absolutely nothing about content. So then the second half of Pingis Praises, well, it's Barbary saying, well, okay, so the Buddha's so amazing. Why then don't you spend all your time, your every moment with this man Gautama, this universe of wisdom and world of understanding? And then Pingis just says, well, I can't, I'm too old. I can't follow him on his wanderings. But then you just get this very beautiful part where, you know, Pingis says, there is no moment for me, however small, that is spent away from Gautama, from this universe of wisdom, this world of understanding. You see, sir, with constant and careful vigilance, it is possible for me to see him with my mind as clearly as with my eyes, in night as well as day. And since I spend my nights revering him, there is not, to my mind, a single moment spent away from him. I cannot now move away from the teaching of Gautama. The powers of confidence and of joy, of intellect and awareness hold me there. So he's talking about how the practice of recollecting the Buddha has spontaneously arisen for him. The Buddha didn't give it him as a practice, you know, so later on the Buddha does give recollection of the Buddha to people as a practice. Not here. It's just, you know, it's just that is what has arisen in Pingis' mind and in his meditation. And it's like he can feel what the effects of that are on him to bring the Buddha to mind, to orient again and again. You know, it's sort of like wherever we are, just coming into relation again and again with the enlightened mind. And then you get the end of Pingis Praises where, you know, so he's hundreds of miles away and then you just get, then the Buddha spoke. And you're like, oh. But Pingis doesn't jump up and say, where did that come from? You know, he just takes it completely as natural that, you know, he's so in touch with the Buddha. Why should the Buddha not speak to him? He's always in contact with the Buddha. So why would the Buddha not be able to communicate with him? Do we take this seriously? You know, do we, you know, when we're engaging in sadhana or recollection of the Buddha, are we doing that with this sense of trust that actually we bring to mind the Buddha or our yidam? We are in contact with the enlightened mind. It's not just in our minds, it's like, yeah. Anyhow. So then the Buddha spoke. Pingis, he said, other people have freed themselves by the power of confidence. Vakali, Bhadravada, and Alavi Gautama have all done this. You too should let that strength release you. You too will go to the further shore, beyond the draw of death. And then Pingis has this response, these words are the words of a man of wisdom. As I hear them, I become more confident. And right at the end, yes, I shall go there. I shall go beyond change. I shall go beyond formations. I shall go beyond comparison. There are no more doubts. You may consider this as mind released. So I've heard it said that Pingis is getting enlightened at that moment, and actually that is what the commentaries say. In fact, the commentaries describe each of the brahmins becoming enlightened as the Buddha answers their questions, and also hundreds and thousands of other students. It gets all a bit Mahayana in the commentaries, where like there's not just the 16 brahmins, there's like everybody they've brought with them, and there's like umpteen, whatever some Mahayana word for a large number is, and they're all getting enlightened at the same time, and you're like, oh yes, this is how the Pali Canon transitions into the Mahayana, isn't it? Yeah, but that's not actually what the text says. You know, the text doesn't say that Pingis is enlightened, but basically, like the Buddha says, yes, this path will take you all the way. You will get enlightened, and Pingis just says, yes, I will. That is, he's so in touch with that level of faith that he knows that that strength will release him. In a way, he doesn't need to worry about the goal anymore. He's living the path. He's living his relationship with the Buddha. And in a way, he just doesn't need to worry about like when he's going to get enlightened or what happens next. It's just like he can just relax in the knowledge that this faith, he's got the right road. He's got that quality. He can just relax into it with total confidence that this will take him to enlightenment. And again, we might want to think, well, when can we touch that level of faith? So what I find really fascinating about the Way to the Beyond chapter is you've just got this very strong contrast between the form, like the sort of story and the action of what happens, and the content, what the teaching is. Because, like what's said, all the Buddha's responses, it's a path of wisdom, it's a path of clarity, it's a path of renunciation, it's a path of mindfulness. And just see things the way they are. But that's not what happens in the story. The story is a faith story from start to finish. Just like hearing the, Bhavari had to have faith in what the goddess said to him. His students had to have faith in what the goddess had said to their teacher. It takes a lot of faith to just kind of like up sticks and just sort of walk randomly thinking, well, I think a goddess said there was a Buddha up here, so I'm just going to go and look, So there's a very strong faith component there. And then when all the Brahmins are kind of interacting with the Buddha, I mean, basically what you can hear is their commitment to the spiritual path. They're going for refuge. They're, everything in them wants awakening. They're just desperate. You can just hear their faith just kind of erupting out of them. And then you get this final part with Pingis, where he goes back and he expresses to Bhavari what it was like to meet the Buddha. And what he describes is a total path of faith. This thing about the path of faith, well, how does that work? So we've got faith as what is ultimate in us, resonating with what is ultimate in the universe. And trusting that, that's alchemical, that changes us, that can take us all the way. To stay in touch with the enlightened mind, that is transformative. All we have to do is keep turning towards that kind of response that knows truth and values truth. We can see it as going for refuge. So this is Bhante in the history of my going for refuge. Going for refuge was the response of one's total being to the truth. One committed oneself to the truth, surrendered to the truth, wanted to devote one's whole life to the truth. And this effect could be produced not only by the hearing of the Dharma, but also by the sight of the Buddha or the sight of the Sangha, or even by the sight of a team of order members and mitras at work. So, Bhante's got this kind of like levels of going for refuge. And, real going for refuge is seeing the nature of reality. And we can also see this path of faith as direct insight. So famously, the Buddha says, one who sees the Dharma sees me. But it's also true to say that one who sees the Buddha sees the Dharma. Because if you see the Buddha in terms of like what the Buddha actually is, what an awakened mind actually is, that is being in touch with the nature of reality. You're in touch with a being or a mind that is not different from the nature of reality. Bhante talks in the end of the survey, which nobody ever gets to, and he talks there amongst all the different schools about the Pure Land school and how faith in the Pure Land schools becomes the equivalent of insight. It's like in the Pure Land tradition where they talk about faith, basically they're meaning insight. And Bhante says, faith of this kind is not faith in the current sense of the term, but the emotional counterpart of wisdom. It's perfectly possible to indicate that faculty in us which perceives reality. We can call that faith, or we could call it wisdom. But in a way, it's just what facet do you want to draw out? How do you want to express that kind of knowing of one's whole being? So we might be more of a wisdom type or a faith type or possibly some other type. But in a way, I suppose what the Way to the Beyond chapter is saying that, there's a path to awakening and we can do it. It is possible for us. And, people down the centuries, this whole tradition, the Buddhist tradition coming from, the time of the Buddha with those brahmins walking across India, people practicing in this tradition and realizing awakening ever since, and that they could do it and we can do it. And quite often it feels like the biggest barrier for us is, can we trust that we can do it? Can we have faith in our own ability to see and to know?